to the City of Lawrence Common Council Finance and Administration meeting. We do have a quorum. And before we get started, President of Council Chaffetz would like to give a couple remarks.
Good evening. In order for us to stick to our budget calendar and to move forward with the 2019 budget, I have assigned myself as a member of the Finance Committee effective immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Chaffetz. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move forward with the business at hand. We have a couple, let's see, we got 5 proposals today that we will be discussing. And so I would like to go ahead and ask Mr. Fenwick to come down, please. And if councilors, if it's okay with you, I'm going to talk to Mr. Fenwick. And what is the first proposal I think it'll be best for you that you'd like to discuss where we can start?
I don't mind just going down the list in the order that it's in. So,
Okay, so we can start with proposal 12.
14?
yes, 14.
Okay, I was going 12, 13, right, 12 is not in my, okay, sorry.
Proposal 14 is the 2019 salary ordinance for police and fire. The ordinance in terms of the details as it relates to technical pays, longevity, college pay, et cetera, is identical to the current ordinance. There were no changes there. The only change in this ordinance is we are proposing a 3% salary increase for all police and fire, police officers and firefighters. So that's the only change to the ordinance from the current 2018 salary ordinance.
And that's consistent with their contract?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Fenwick, I got one question. When it comes to, I guess we'll start with both departments. I'm just curious, the job titles for fire and police, are these positions all currently filled? And if not, which ones are not currently filled?
I'm going to look back to the chiefs, but I actually believe with Monday swearing in, we're at full strength in both departments. So they're all filled.
Excellent, excellent.
Any additional questions?
Yeah.
Now I'd like to make, you have a question?
I do, because I know that part of this, a few years ago, we were able to do some funding because of the Public Safety Tax Fund. And if we could just take a few minutes
Sure.
and walk through that, because I noticed that what we're projecting and what we're getting it's not truing up at the same time, it looks like. And so I'm sure at some point it might catch up, but if you could just walk us through, since we passed this, I think it was 4 years ago.
So on page,
That'd be 224. It's on the tab, the public safety tax, just for.
and that would be
Committee members.
maybe refer you to page 139 under that public safety tax tab. Let me know when everybody's there.
Okay. All righty.
Okay.
So as Councilor Chevlot pointed out, you can see in 2014, there was a slight uptick in revenue compared to 2013. I believe the tax was implemented mid-year that year. So we really didn't start experiencing the full year's effect of that until 2015. It's been reasonably constant since then, obviously, because there hasn't been an increase in the tax. What we are budgeting in 2019 is just right at $3 million. I will say that's a conservative number. The state puts out estimates a couple of times a year, and I already know we're a little bit under what their revised estimate is for all income tax revenue. So the revenue forecast on our end is a little conservative. We did budget more than that amount, but we do have one-time expenditures in there.
Okay.
So to the extent we get below about My comfort level is about $1 million in that fund balance. Once we get down to that number, if we have one-time expenses in there, we'll probably need to either forego those or move those to another fund. So
So that 341,000 is more of a one-time
Yeah,
expenditure, nothing
yes.
that, okay, that answers my question, thank you.
All right. Councilors, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend this to full council.
I'll second.
All right. A motion has been made. It's been seconded. All in favor? A show of hands. Any disapprovals? No one there? Passes. All right. Well, recommend that to full council. All right. So moving right along, please. We'll go to excuse me. Proposal number 15, which is fixing salaries of appointed officers and employees of the city of Lawrence. So, a little discussion on this, sir.
sure. Similar to the police and fire salary ordinance, we are proposing a 3% increase, and that's reflected in the ranges for both the exempt and non-exempt full-time positions. None of the other either board salaries or other pays have changed, so it's basically the 3% amount. Pretty much about it.
All right.
Couple,
Yes.
I'm wondering if it's, if we can, I'm going to offer up an amendment to this, Proposal 15, and it's just on one position. It is the Director of Parks and Rec. So if we were to look at Director of Public Works, Director of Economic Development, Public PIO, the Public Information Officer, Director of Communications, their salary band is all at the 82,750. The Director of Parks and Rec is at 76, and so I would submit that we would make an amendment to at least make it in parity. Doesn't mean that this person's going to that, but it's in parity that the band is consistent with other department heads. Does that make sense? Right now, it's at 76,077, but when you look at the other directors of departments, they're all at 82,700, 82,750.
How is the ban established?
The bands that are in here since I've been here, when we've proposed 3% each year, I've basically proposed 3% on whatever the max of that band was. I can tell you on those 4 comparable positions and including the parks position, the current salaries are all comparable for each of the employees in those positions. They're not at the max band. I do agree with Councilor Chevlot that for consistency purposes, to have the max range, similar would be a good thing, but they're certainly below those right now also.
If I can ask, please, I don't have a problem with this at all, but I guess if we're using the word director is what's supposed to trigger this pay, then I can't, just to make sure that no one gets left out, director on the back end is different than director on the front end, I guess, right? I mean, director of,
Yeah, that's a good point.
you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if the planning building director, or does he have the same kind of staff? It might be a person of one, where the parks guy is managing a team of 20 or something. I don't know. But I don't oppose to consistency. If we're going to do that, I just hope that we're not leaving anyone out.
Is the planning and building director and streets director, are they subordinate to the director of a department? Would that be the difference?
We don't currently have a planning and building
don't think
director,
so.
so I'm
Okay,
not sure
okay.
what the hierarchy.
So the streets director reports to the director of public works and code enforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that makes
might
sense.
be
Yeah,
why.
that makes sense.
One other question then, and I know we ran into this last year, and I just want to make sure we have this conversation because I think it was Councilor Giles, when we talked about this 3% salary increase, it was tethered to being able to set up this fund to be able to pay out these retirees. Are we leveraged again to this year?
We currently don't have the fund proposal on the agenda. We're not tethered to that.
Okay.
I would say we are tethered to the accrued leave ordinance, which is, I believe, the item after the next one on the agenda.
Yeah.
And that was similar to last year. We had proposed some modifications to our current leave ordinance. It is important to kind of tie those two together, because if we don't address for new hires our leave policy, then we're kind of doubling down, in my opinion, on the liability we have. So those two are tied together, in my opinion. But the trust fund is not, it's independent, because regardless of what happens with these two,
Okay.
we need to get that established at some point.
So can we talk about the leave?
Well, and that's what,
Instead of,
Sure.
right, and that was one of the things that I was going to talk about about the order, because what I don't want to do, well, I guess these are just recommendations. I mean, we have to get full approval, but
can we sort of pin this until we've heard
Yeah,
the next proposal?
yeah, can we have a discussion on another proposal?
can I address the amendment? You get address it.
There's been a motion to amend.
So I wanted to get a second on the amendment to change the range, and then
And we can come back.
we'll come back to approval.
All right.
All right. So can I get a second?
I'll second it.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor by show of hands. All right. Approved. No one here approve. It's been approved. Thank you. All right. So then we'll just leave 15 kind of idle as far as approving it. We just amended the salary range, and then we'll move on and discuss. Excuse me. We'll move on then, councilors, and come back to proposal number 15. And so let's discuss proposal number 16, which is transferring
Let's,
17.
17?
17. I'm sorry, I flipped my page. I'm sorry. We need to to move to 17, which is amending the municipal code of the city of Lawrence regarding employee benefits and overtime. All right. I think you've prepared, did you prepare a slideshow for this? Okay, Mr. Fenwick,
So maybe I think we reviewed this last week, but I'd like to kind of just touch base again on where the liabilities currently stand before I get into the details of the leave ordinance. So as of June 1st of this year, citywide, the total accrued leave liability is $4.7 million. And what that is every employee, the unused but earned vacation, personal, sick, you name it, time that we have on our books. If every employee were to leave today, we would owe $4.7 million. Now, not every employee is going to leave today, but that's the total liability that we have right now facing us at some point in the future. That number's grown by about 400,000 year over year. And so the next three comparisons on that page showed just different possibilities. So right now, employees with at least 20 years of service, so potentially, getting near retirement eligibility, our liability is $2.2 million. Moving further to the right, over the next 2 years, employees who will then have at least 20 years of service, that liability is $2.8 million. And then again, moving to the right, over the next 5 years, employees who will have at least reached 20 years of service, that number jumps to $3.9 million. And honestly, that's the number that concerns me, is I think we have some looming spikes coming in payouts, and that's, what we need to, get out ahead of. The next page, again, just shows the year-over-year change in these liabilities. They've all grown with the total citywide liability. The increase year-over-year is about 400,000, a little over. And then lastly, the comparison by departments. 85% of this liability is public safety. Utilities is the next biggest department, which is about a little over 300,000. Parks is next at a little over 140,000, and then communications rounding up at 100. I think public safety, parks, and communications are certainly the worrisome ones. I think we can manage the utility payouts as they come, but those other 4 departments right now are the ones that I think over the next 5 years we're going to have a challenge.
It stands to reason, given that 75% of our budget's in one of those 3 buckets, public safety and communications. So
That's
it
right.
stands to reason that this is higher indexed.
Yep.
So the 2.2 million, how many employees does that represent?
The 2.2, don't have that number with me, but I want to say it was about 30.
Okay. Okay.
I think I get the full of all that back there. So,
Go ahead.
pulling up one other thing. Yeah, that's it. There, yeah, thanks. So in what I handed out, if you could flip to the page that's titled Vacation Policy. And this will summarize what is being proposed to be changed in the leave ordinance, which is proposal 17. So for vacation time, currently, if you're a new hire, you're not eligible for any vacation until after your first year. So on the first day of your second year, you get 96 hours. That's given to you on the first day of the year, and you now have 96 hours to use. And that's how we credit vacation time, if you will, for all employees each year, regardless of how many years they have. And obviously, the amount you get at the first of the year increases based on years of service. So what we are proposing, and this is for new hires only, it would be for new hires after January 1st or effective January 1st. They will start accruing vacation time monthly. They will be eligible in their first year to use that time, provided they've earned it. The amounts that they can earn each year don't change compared to current employees. In other words, in 0 to 3 years, it's 96 hours, 4 to 7, 96, 8 to 15, going down those varying charts. So the total amount they can earn stays the same as current employees. It's just how they accrue is changing. Other than that, that's the only change with vacation time. There is no impact on current employees. They will continue to earn and accrue as they currently do. For both new hires and current employees, they're allowed to carry, subject to department head approval and controller's office approval, they're allowed to carry over 80 hours of vacation time that's not been used, but it has to be then used in the current year that they carry it forward to. So that stays the same. So I think what this really does for new hires, one, it just in today's day and age, in our opinion, it's not fair to ask somebody to come and work for a year without being able to, take a single day off. That was the biggest change there. And quite frankly, vacation time isn't our biggest liability problem. It is a problem the way it is currently accredited for employees, given it's all upfront on day one, but that'll change for new hires because it's being accrued monthly. So that's the change on vacation.
Wait, I'm sorry. Well, to make sure I'm correct. The way that the vacation time monthly will occur for new hires, but if you are existing, you will continue to get all your vacation time in
That's right.
January.
All these changes in this ordinance were meant to draw a line in the sand and say we have to at least start addressing this liability on new hires so that 20 years from now, we don't find ourselves continuously in this position of having to cough up several $100,000 a year for future payouts. So it draws a line in the sand.
So from a financial liability perspective, if you have an employee who is at their 25th year, January 1, and they get their 288 hours, and then they retire in June, you pay them out the whole 288 hours?
Provided they,
Prorate it.
we would pay out any of that 288 that they've not used. So if they haven't used any, they'll get it.
That's a sweet deal.
We're in this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's partly what we're faced with this. On page 2, you were talking about this, I mean, they've earned it.
Correct.
They don't use it, they keep it, and that's the payout. Can I ask, were you done?
Yes.
Sorry. So on the, it's not numbered, but it's talking about the city created a leave liability trust fund last year, contributed 200,000 into it. And it says, and I wanted to ask this last meeting, but it wasn't the appropriate time. It says no withdrawals will be made on it until it's been $1 million or more. So how, if we're not going to touch this for that million threshold, which is, I think it's good to have a threshold, how then are we going to be covering this liability? Is it coming from our reserves?
It'll have to come from either current year budget or reserves, yes.
And you set the $1 million mark as a benchmark?
Yeah, for now. I think, the goal, particularly given these funds won't be touched, we should be able to, get some modest interest earnings on that. But, just a reasonable goal that I know that I think we can achieve, number one, without really affecting operations. I mean, the prudent thing to do would be to put about 2.5 million in there today.
Yep.
But that would have I think, a drastic impact on operations. And so we're trying to balance, not affecting services and other things we want to accomplish, but at the same time, getting a fund in place so that, once it's there, even if it alleviates this problem in the, if you're looking at a curve, I think our problem is going to start doing this and hit a peak and then slow down. And even if we can just manage through that process, which I think getting to $1 million will go a long way.
Well, yeah, you can't touch it for 5 years. So coincidentally, that parallels with your,
Correct.
I'm sure that was intentional, but
Yes.
it's helpful to, in 5 years, we have a liability of almost 4 million. At least you got $1 million there that'll take some of that off if we don't.
And again, those, the 5-year mark worries me because I do think we'll start to see, and I think we're already going to start to see a pickup in some retirements, but that 4 million or whatever the number was of people eligible, employees eligible in 5 years for at least greater than 20 years of service, I think it's reasonable to assume not all of those are also then immediately out the door. So I think over a 5 to 10 year period, we may see that number, come to fruition, but not, in year 5.
And so would it be a possibility that the trust could be modified if we deemed it necessary based on, what we see in an influx of retirements over the next, 1, 2, 3 years? To where right now, to Tom's point, it says 200,000 won't be touched until it accumulates to 1 million. That's 5 years from now. But what if it said contribute 200,000 and accumulated to 600,000 or to 650? Just some other number. Do we have the ability to basically modify that million if we needed to?
Yes, because I think the 200,000 a year and the not touching it, all that's probably more policy versus trust language. Trust would just establish a trust, so that's more of a policy. So it could always, by policy, just hey, it's painful right now. We gotta do something. But my concern was I didn't want to put 200,000 in there in year one and then take 200,000 out in year two to pay a retirement, because then there's kind of no point in setting up a trust. Yeah.
And this is not an irrevocable trust either, which is the other part that concerns me a little bit is
Right now, it's not,
go
correct.
5 years down the road and there's a bunch of new people sitting up here and up there maybe, what we're looking at is right now, that money can be pulled out and used for a variety of reasons, providing it gets approval by the council.
Today it can, yes.
Well, but it specifically says once you convert the funds, that the funds in this trust are strictly limited for payment of accrued leave.
And that would be upon conversion to an irrevocable trust, yes. Then at that point, those funds cannot be used for anything but these leave payouts.
So currently, right now, our trust is just
It's a
general fund
accounting
trust.
term,
Yeah.
Yes,
just an account with some cash in there.
yeah. Which was step one to at least, get this going.
Okay. Well, I guess we got into the trust conversation, which is actually not on the agenda, but it does all tie in. I mean, we all know what we're doing. And we all understand what's going on. But I do want to kind of pull this back around to the actual proposal at hand. I do think it's important, though, that we discuss, or at least have a clear understanding for the record, that if we approve proposal number 17, that then that allows us to, well, I guess I could say this, if we disapprove proposal number 17, then 15 has to be amended?
Kind of interject on that. So 15 wouldn't have to be amended, but then when we get into 18 would have to be amended,
That's the budget.
which is what we did last year, and we amended down from salaries into other benefits with the sole purpose, if there was a retirement, we would have funds in the current budget to pay that. So that would be the budget that would need to be amended. You could certainly take the 3% out of the salary ordinance, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's 3% provided. It's reflective in the appropriation.
Right.
Right, the appropriation is what, if the appropriation doesn't happen, then it's none of the motor's not there for these other proposals to go. Okay. So really, the key to this is
Can you tell me how the accrual affects current employees? Carryover, I'm sorry, carryover.
Carryover is the same. It's, you can request 80 hours, subject to your department head approving it, and then controller's office approving it. If it's granted, you have to then use it in the carry forward year. So basically, for new hires and current employees, that won't change. They'll be allowed to carry over on vacation time 80 hours and then use it in the following year.
I also have another question, just trying to figure out how this ordinance and the collective bargaining agreement with our public safety officers, I've never seen the actual collective bargaining agreement, so I don't know if there's language in there that leaves this part of that agreement open, or, what leeway do we really have?
For both police and fire, those that were covered under the contract upon the contract signing are grandfathered in. But at the same time, none of these changes but one in this ordinance affect current employees, so this ordinance wouldn't have had an impact anyway, but they are grandfathered in. But new hires aren't grandfathered and therefore would be subject to this ordinance.
So, okay. So new hires who were not hired when the collective bargaining agreement was signed,
But
it doesn't apply to them?
the way this ordinance is written, it's new hires on January 1st, 2019 and beyond. So anybody hired to this point would be covered under the contract and grandfathered in. So anybody that we've hired this year is covered under the contract. Anybody we hire next year, if this were to pass, would be under the new ordinance.
So basically, we're changing benefits of police and fire that are new hires in 2019. I understand. I mean, this is. I'm sorry. I'm way out of my maybe out of my field, but it seems like we might have some issues with collective bargaining. Like, I don't understand how you can have a signed contract, union contract, and then a guy gets hired under that same
It was
commitment.
specifically written into the contract.
Oh, to leave that door.
Yeah.
Oh, they agreed to that
Specifically in the
during the
contract.
negotiations. Okay, so that's why I said I initially have not read the contract. It just kind of, I knew it had to be some sort of exemption. It didn't make sense to a collective bargaining agreement. Okay, I don't want to, okay. Can't be doing no union busting around here. All right, so we've jumped around to several different proposals and talk. So right now, it is proposal. I got confused, guys. Got to get me back on track here.
17.
17. All right.
So there were basically 4 changes to the ordinance, vacation being one. If I could have you flip to the next page, which is sick leave. For new hires, the way they accrue sick leave doesn't change. However, they will only be allowed to carry over 200 hours. In any given year, if they have more than that, they will lose that at the end of the year. So the max they will have on our books is 200 hours. Versus right now, there is no limit on what you can accrue. There is a limit on what is paid out, but it's higher than 200. So on it, if a person's been here a long time and has never been sick, the max we would ever pay out on a new hire is 200 hours. And again, for current employees, there's no change.
So the okay, so this is just, I know you're going through this, so I'm sorry, I may be getting ahead of you, so I'm gonna let you go ahead, Jason, sorry.
No, that's no problem.
I'll wait.
We want to finish, or you want to ask? Go ahead and ask a
I'll
question. Okay. The next page is, it's bonus hours. And again, for new hires, they will still earn 96 hours in a calendar year. I think the big change is they will only be allowed to carry they'll be allowed to carry over 96, but then that has to be used in that then current year, or you lose it. So the max you can carry on our books would be 96 hours versus right now it's unlimited.
So that gets to the issue of employees that have earned 500 hours, but imagine a 500-hour payout at $65,000. So this mitigates.
Yes.
This is what you're talking about 5, 7, 10 years down the road. Okay.
The last change, which is the only one that impacts current employees, is for both new hires and current employees, we would eliminate personal leave, which I believe is the equivalent of about 2 days a year on personal days. So we would eliminate that for both new hires and current employees. Part of the thought there was there have been 2 extra holidays granted around Thanksgiving and Christmas, I believe. So in essence, it's a wash in terms of days off, if you will.
So do you know what the savings is? Presents for those 2 days per,
In terms of the liability, that's not a large number in terms of the impact on that.
okay.
And those are the only changes being proposed in the leave ordinance.
So, okay, let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
If it's not a large impact, then why change it?
It's a good question. I think it's simply, there were two extra days granted, so it'd probably be one or the other via, holidays. So if we didn't take personal days away, we probably would consider perhaps a change on the holiday, but
Okay.
that's it.
Is personal leave one of these other buckets that you can continue to bank? So if you've been here for 20 years and you get 2 personal days a year, so it's 40 days, is that part of this bucket that's filling in this?
It is, and let me,
Whereas if you're still given the 2 days during the year and it's a holiday, you're not having to accrue for, I see.
yep.
Right. Makes a lot more sense. I think I like that too, in the sense that those actual vacation days will be, the cost of that will be handled in the calendar budget instead of those dollars rolling over into basically other budgets. So, I mean, that's the situation that we really have at the end of the day, is that we got commitments that were made from prior administrations, but the cost of it keeps rolling into the other budgets. And so that's, I mean, that's the common sense I'm trying to make of that, where it does save us money by going ahead and giving them 2 holidays compared to letting them control those 2 days. And we end up paying for it. It was granted in 2018 and we pay it out in 2021. I mean,
Well, and I think that was part of our thought process, particularly with most of these changes only affecting new hires, is current employees were made promises in previous years that in lieu of raises or compensation, time was given. And in essence, it's part of their base, whether it's salary or a benefit, but that was a commitment that was made. And so we didn't propose hardly any changes to that other than the personal hours. And I think our goal, particularly given the financial condition of the city right now, is we would rather, reward employees through compensation versus, additional leave time, hence the changes for new hires.
You're really not awarding them, it's actually just a deferred comp plan
Correct.
that 5 and 10 years down the road.
Which unfortunately has put the city in a
Yeah.
challenging position, here soon, because we're going to feel some pain at some point.
so I'll go ahead and use the classic political term. We got to deal with this because the can's been kicked to us.
Absolutely.
I mean, the chickens will come home to roost. I got a couple other one-liners too. We beat this up enough, guys? We got understanding that? Okay.
I make a motion to move to full council for approval, proposal number 17, given that we're going out of order, and I think we'll go back to,
I second it.
Second. Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? There's no one here to oppose. Motion passes for recommendation. Okay. Now, make sure I'm back in order. Now we want to go back to 15. Okay. And talk about the salary ordinance. Well, so, I mean, we kind of discussed it. So do you have any further?
oh, right,
Yeah.
my amended version.
Right, your amended version of 15, which balances out those directors. If there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion for that as well.
Make a motion to move to full council for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we move motion, proposal number 15, to recommendation for full council. All in favor, show of hands. So there's no one here to oppose, motion carries. All right. And then the next proposal that we have to discuss, guys, is proposal number 18, which is a proposal.
We didn't do 16.
Yeah, can we do 16?
Oh, shit.
We skipped over that to get to the leave ordinance.
Transfer of,
Right. Sorry, guys. Thought I had it in order. All right, so actually, I'm sorry for that. For the record, we're going to move on to proposal number 16, which is transferring unused and encumbered tax levy funds to the general fund, right? This is to fund the budget.
Proposal number 16 is identical to one we brought last year at the budget. We had then, I think it was 4 or 5 dormant funds, and dormant fund being there's been no activity for at least 5 years, so the money's just been sitting there. By state statute, we can transfer it to either the general fund or the rainy day fund. So the 3 funds in question here total $104,414. They were, one was in fact, I think all 3 were old debt funds. So those bonds have matured. You know, there's basically, if we do nothing, the money in these 3 funds will sit there in perpetuity. So we're proposing to transfer it to the general fund, and then similar to last year, once it's in the general fund, we will then propose transferring it into the trust fund that was set up last year for those liabilities. So this will go in, you know, by state statute, it has to go into the general fund, but from there, it will go into that trust fund. And we did that this year, so there's $200,000 sitting currently in the trust fund, and then this 100 plus another 100 out of the general fund budget, which has been proposed, would get us another 200,000 into the trust fund next year.
So at the end of 2018, if these funds are appropriated, what is our balance in the trust fund?
At the end of 2018, it'll be 200,000 because we've already moved that in this year's budget. Then at the end of 2019, it'd be 400,000. Part of that will be these dormant funds, and then the balance coming from what's in our general fund proposal.
Okay, so you're saying the dormant funds won't be moved until
2019.
2019?
Yes.
Okay.
And the dormant funds is what you're using to make up the 200,000. It's not going to 200,000 and, you know, almost 300 grand. This is gonna help make up the 2.
Yeah, the sum of this ordinance is about 100, and I'll round up 105,000, and that will go directly ultimately into the trust.
That's not uncommon to have monies left over in bonds that were issued from years ago that may have paid off early and interest
Yep,
they accrued that didn't have to spend it, so it's a nice find to have.
yeah.
All right, if there's any further questions, if there's no further questions, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion for
I
approval.
do have another question.
Yes.
So I'm wondering how we might be able to use those funds for the situation where we had this year, where we had the 2 people retire, and then we had to reappropriate $60,000. We know that it's going into the trust fund, but the trust fund, we won't be able to do anything with those funds for, 5 years. So, you know what I'm asking about that? Like, how can we use the funds, this 105,000, to help us real time?
We could. The reason I'm proposing moving it to the trust, because I don't think right now we need to. So in the 2019 budget proposal, most of this liability problem occurs in the general fund, because that's where we fund public safety. And so I'm projecting we'll be in excess of a 20% fund balance at the end of this year in the general fund. 20%'s been my goal from the day I walked in. Once we hit 20%, I'm not going to then say, okay, next year we need to get to 30, 40,
Right.
20%'s kind of where we need to be, and we're there. So if we were at 17% or 12%, to your point, I'd probably say maybe let's take some of this dormant fund money and use it to pay what we have to pay out today. But because we're where we need to be fund balance wise, and in fact, we're over that, and we are also budgeting in anticipation of at least some known retirements in the current proposed budget. So absent, again, something like what just happened where we didn't expect those 3, I would not expect having to come back next year to say, hey, by the way, I need, whatever the number is,
Okay.
That could, I'm not saying it could,
Right.
it could happen, because,
Possible.
anything can happen, but, we have budgeted some funds for retirements.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll make a motion to recommend proposal number 16 to full council.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that proposal number 16 be moved to full council for recommendation. All in favor, for show of hands. Since there's no one here to oppose, motion carries. All right. Make sure. Believe it's time now for proposal number 18 to be discussed. It is a proposal for an ordinance, a proposal for an ordinance for appropriation of tax rates for the 2019 budget year. Mr. Fenwick.
If I could, before I get into just kind of high level on the budget, just to recap kind of the proposed calendar, and this is virtually identical to what it's been the last 2 years. So on October, well, let me get into September first. So we would propose publication of the notice of public hearing to taxpayers a week from today on September 20th, with the public hearing to occur on the full council meeting on October 1st. And then the adoption date of October 17th. That's the same schedule we've had the last 2 years. Then in terms of proposal number 19, and all of this is summarized in detail in the budget book, but we have 14 funds in the budget proposal. If you would like, I can just read a quick summary.
You said proposal 19? You mean 18?
18, sorry, yes.
Scared me.
So the 14 funds are the general fund, our motor vehicle highway fund, and the local road and street fund, which comprises street department funding, our park non-reverting fund, the law enforcement continuing education fund, the cumulative capital improvement fund, our emergency medical services fund, the police pension fund, public safety tax fund, 2 internal services funds, and then 3 debt service funds. Those comprise proposal 18. And again, I'd like to highlight kind of overall where we are with this budget, in particular with the general fund. So it is a balanced budget. We are proposing revenue sources of just over 23 million. And we're also proposing a budget that's just over 23 million. We're forecasting on that 20% reserve that we will both begin and end the year with a $4.5 million reserve in the general fund. And I'd like to pull up a chart just to show kind of where we've come. And this is in the budget summary section of the book, which would be page 36. But what the chart shows is our general fund operating balance each year. On the left-hand side of the chart is the actual balance. On the bottom is each year. I would like to point out there were a couple of skinny years, if you will, in 2011 and 12, where the general fund's operating balance in 2011 was just under 90,000, and in 2012 it was just at 60,000. In the year 2015, the general fund's operating balance was 1.5 million. So we've been setting goals each year starting at 10%, and the end result was to get to 20%. And thankfully, we've been able to get there We are projecting to be in excess of that 20% at the end of this year by about 500,000. And so our goal was if we could maintain 20%, anything above that, we would then look to do one-time capital investments into the city, and that's also in the 2019 proposal. So I'm pretty pleased with where we are now. This will have an impact on a variety of things. This has allowed us to discontinue borrowing tax anticipation notes. Most municipalities in Indiana borrow because in April, May, you kind of run a cash deficit until property tax are paid in June, and then same in September, October, November. This is the first year in probably decades that Lawrence has not had to borrow to fund its cash flow deficits, and what that translates into is we've easily saved over $100,000 in interest costs in that borrowing, so we've eliminated that. It also allows us to now get a little more proactive in our short-term investments, so we can actually start to earn interest on the funds we have. It's also a very important, it gets categorized as a rainy day fund or an emergency fund, but if there is an unforeseen emergency or revenues start to decline, we do have a cushion here to prevent us from having to manage a variety of things on a year-to-year basis if we're in a skinny situation, if you will. And probably just as importantly, given we're in the early stages of building the police headquarters, we do have a bond anticipation note right now on that will then need to be financed long-term. My expectation with a 20% operating reserve in the general fund is our current bond rating is A+. We should easily be into the AA category with this reserve. And what that will do is lower the borrowing cost by at least 0.5% or 50 basis points, which should translate, my guess is, into conservatively at least $1 million in savings on that borrowing. So having this 20% does a lot of things for the city, and quite frankly, it's something that we should try to maintain in perpetuity to the extent we can. But all of that's in our budget proposal. The $500,000 that we have proposed to spend on one-time capital investments, we've split that into 3 projects. One is to resurface Harmon Way, which is by Community Park, new playground equipment for Explorer Park, and then we've also put into the capital section of the city council's budget $100,000 for the city council to determine a project of their choice. So that's the. Go ahead.
It's a start.
Yes. Other highlights, kind of high level with the budget is, we will be, we've got $1.3 million allocated for paving. We've bumped up sidewalk repairs, streetlight repairs, anticipating, purchasing more or replacing more police vehicles next year. Could go on and on, but right now I think those are kind of the highlights of what's contained in this budget.
I do have a question about this budget. Was there anything in particular in this budget that was addressed? It doesn't matter about which department, that it's been something that maybe has needed to be addressed for quite some time, and we finally were able to kind of get them some resources, or I just want to kind of know if are we kind of taking better care of our guys if possible in this 2019 budget, building towards, I know you talked about the police cars and stuff like that, but.
I think obviously we have department heads here and they're certainly welcome to speak for their department, but the street department in particular, there's a lot of funding. We're adding a new staff position for the street department. It does have the potential to become a second one depending on, how we look funding-wise mid-year, but there is funding for a new full-time position at the street department. There's new equipment at the street department. Like I said, with the paving, we're proposing $1.3 million, with the expectation we would apply for the community crossings grant again to get matching funding. There's funding, doubling the funding for streetlights. I think we doubled the funding for sidewalk repairs. So to your point, I think we're doing a lot, and we have been doing a lot to address the needs at the street department.
Okay.
So just for the street department, what didn't you get that you feel like you needed in the budget? Okay.
Well, that's good to know. I do have something, and I apologize. It hit my mind. I don't know if we should have discussed this in the salary ordinance, but surprised this did not come up. Have we addressed our code enforcement officer issue in this budget in some sort of way?
I believe we have. I would like DPW to, also elaborate on that. One of the things we did was it kind of helped the street department, but moved a position that was in the street department back into DPW to do more code enforcement. But if you guys want to.
Yeah, so we're in the process of hiring another inspector. All of our inspectors are cross-trained, so anyone can do code enforcement, building code, anything like that. Right now, we have three code enforcement inspectors on staff. Adding another one, there would be a fourth.
Okay. Well, I assumed you've been coming to council meetings and heard some of that. It seems to be clear as mud so I'm not discrediting anything that you're saying, sir. I don't mean to do that. I just know that this is an issue that's been coming up in our council meetings for, all year this year. And I thought, I don't know, we had talked about, maybe this is something that we could address in the budget just to, kind of make sure that folks are getting what they need. So my only concern is when you add that fourth, I'm assuming that you're adding the fourth because of these deals. So I would hope that if you have 3 cross-trained or 4 cross-trained people, would your goal be that out of the 4, we have maybe 40 hours of code enforcement going on throughout the city per week? I mean, does that make...
So to answer your question, we're a complaint-based agency. Complaints have to come in. There hasn't been a single complaint filed with this department this year under our current working conditions that hasn't been visited or inspected.
Now, I will say this, sir, just out of all fairness, you definitely know that you're on the record saying that, and I just will tell you that come to the next council meeting prepared to prove that, because I believe you're going to be called to the mat. That's just being honest. From what because that's been, and I'm only addressing this because I know that this may be our opportunity to kill this, but for whatever the case may be, there's some lack of communication between the administration or the way I don't know. I don't know what to say, but I just know that there are folks on this council that's not in this committee that have voiced serious concerns on the record, off the record, and I'm just trying to see if that's something that we can get it taken care of and move forward to the next challenge. So that's my issue. So I'm going to trust your plan. I just hope that your plan will be vetted and can stand criticism.
We can't keep talking about this. We need a code enforcement officer that does code. I mean, it is a big deal, and I think people do have valid issues and concerns, and I just don't know if you don't have a focused resource that is dedicated to doing specific tasks that you get the same amount of focus than you do when you have someone that's cross-trained to do multiple things. So I would just ask that you consider that,
Sure.
and I appreciate.
I have one other thing that I would also like you to consider, and please don't take this in a chastising way, but crisis case management is a process of the 80s. And what I mean by that is basically you're doing a complaint base that's kind of case management. You're waiting for somebody to call and you go out. Well, that doesn't really change the complexion of our community of what a code enforcement officer should, I think, feel like could do to improve my community. I don't think that, to be honest with you, the culture of the citizen of our city on a vast way is going to flood your office with complaints. I am positive that if you haven't gotten any complaints, that also goes to show you that I've surely gotten a lot of complaints up here that have not been directed to your office. I don't cut grass. So with that being said, something's got to change either in your office or us not giving you the right funding. But since you're not asking me for any funding, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, brother. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, in that sense, because this is a serious issue that's not going to go away. It affects my community more than some of the people, I think, fair to say, that are complaining. But I took a ride in my neighborhood just when I was checking for high water, and there are code issues in my community that maybe the guy across the street wouldn't call you to complain about, but as municipal people that have been elected and appointed and hired to be the keepers of the city, I don't think it's a good plan to wait on people to call you to tell you. I understand that's got to be part of your process, but it sure would be nice, and I think a lot of people in this community, as well as some of these counselors, would like to see more proactiveness.
And that's fair.
And if you need more money to do that, I'm telling you, I think you can get it right now. All right, I don't know what else to say. Well, so we'll, I mean, more words for you. Can we go ahead and entertain a motion for proposal? Well,
I just don't want to do it through the, I just have a few
yes,
other
sir.
brief
Yes.
questions, and they're
Thank you.
kind of macro so you and I had a conversation, it's back to Jason.
Okay, so I
Sorry.
can sit, okay.
yeah, thank you, sir. I'm just,
So we had a conversation, gosh, back in April or May, when I was telling you about the DLGF was giving heads up to municipalities about tax rates. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I've heard this, is the 1% cap still there, but everyone's assessed value is going up. And so it's like we don't want to really say what's behind the curtain, but the reality is that there's incremental tax monies that are coming to the city. And so when I looked at the total budget, we go from 22.3 to 23, about $800,000 increase.
Is this the general fund?
I'm sorry, general fund, yes, page 45. I apologize. And you're right, it's balanced, and that's great, but just two questions. One, the expenses, though, on personal services go up about $1.5 million, $1.4 million, from 15.7 to 17.1. What's baked into that? What's driving that number?
That includes 3%.
Okay,
It also includes additional funding for expected retirements. So that's where those funds would be. And then,
what page are you on again, Tom?
page 45.
5, okay.
It's at the general fund tab. It's like the second page back, first page back.
effectively, those would be the two plus perf and insurance-related costs. But, the
Okay.
bulk of it would be between the 3% salary increase and what I've put in police and fire, especially for expected retirement payouts.
Gotcha. Second question is on page 46, and this is something that I look at when you send your budget reports out, which I appreciate that they're sent out on a timely basis. It's really helpful. As I always look at the remaining budget percentage, and this just jumps out at me, and the economic development, it's number 15. You're at 85% of the budget. And so as you look back at this year, and we're coming to a close, are there any, I can't go, in memory, but are there any particular areas that you're a little concerned that, hey, we're getting up to our threshold of 100% of expenditures? And I'm talking about 18, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm just, but this 19 triggered me to, I'm meaning to ask you this in a committee meeting.
No, and the reason, the 85%'s actually, it's remaining budget, so we're kind of the opposite way on that one. So, and that was with the change from a full-time staff member to.
I figured that.
But right now, no. I mean, I say that and don't want to get a call tomorrow that, hey, we've got a retirement, but, that would be the one thing right now, even yet this year, if there's another unforeseen retirement or two, that I'm not aware of.
Perfect.
That's probably the only worry area right now.
Okay.
So if it was driven by the staffing change, then why is the proposed budget 102,000?
Because I think there is an expectation that perhaps we will go back to a full-time staff next year in that department.
And I know I'm going backwards, but I'm just curious, on Proposal 15, in the past, we've always had the USB board as part of our approval under boards and committees. But this year's, it's left off.
On 15?
Yes.
For a while.
Yeah, there was, in 2016, it was in there.
Oh.
And then there was considerable discussion in 2016 as to whether it was the council or the utility service board. So it's now at the purview of the utility service board.
Yeah, because to be honest with you, I was on the utility service board when this first came up because we gave ourselves a raise and the other committees did not, but we were able to do that because our money comes from USB or something, so I know that was a big
Yeah.
deal.
Thank you. All right. My questions were answered.
If I could just, one thing on your point on the property tax. So the state did put out 3.4% as the growth quotient, which is what all levies are allowed to increase due to the rise in assessed values. So our circuit breakers are going up, but right now, I think the growth is offsetting the increase on the circuit breaker for now. I'm optimistic that at least for the next year or so, that could be the case, but, you can't always.
Okay, so just so I can follow it, so is what you're telling me is that the state now is taking in more than what they're distributing back to the municipalities based on the growth?
No, I think just if you go back since the inception of the property tax caps, the state determines what we're allowed to grow the levy. So even if Lawrence's assessed value went up 12%, we aren't necessarily allowed to levy that 12%.
Right.
They set the percentage has been pretty low, and therefore the caps have always kind of eaten away at that kind of minimal percentage growth, but now they've allowed the last couple of years growth that's been in that 3 to 4% range. So it's having a mitigating effect on the circuit breaker, just meaning we're actually collecting additional tax dollars
Right.
instead of staying flat.
Right. And so I'm saying as assessed values go up, we will continue to increase. But the question becomes, I think what I'm trying to get understanding is we probably need legislation at the state house to increase with hopes that it increases that percentage because those funds
Yeah,
may be there. So we might be looking at a state surplus or things like that. Like, that's what I was trying to say, that there's money that could be potentially going to municipalities that's being collected that they haven't decided on how they're
it
going
would help to have and I think they've done a fairly decent job the last couple of years, but it would help to have a growth quotient. If our growth is higher, that is closer to what our growth is.
Oh, awesome. Well, we look forward to that. Okay, so any other questions germane to proposal to the, so it's proposal number 18.
Councilor Giles, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I want to touch a little bit more on the code enforcement issue. And just a couple of things that maybe didn't get clarified. One of the other things we're doing, besides adding the inspector, is changing a part-time position to full-time. And that's going to enhance our code enforcement on the administration end. The other thing we're working on, we're also, once the e-billing and e-suite, all that is up and running and doing well, we're going to be also looking at electronic permitting, licensing, work order system to better manage all that flow of all that information coming in. So the building inspector that we are hiring, he will be cross-trained as a code inspector, but the vast majority of our inspection load and code compliance is building permit related issues. So along those lines, we will have then two guys, certified building inspectors that know the codes and are certified to inspect those things properly that are permit related. Mr. Halfaker will be able to do a lot more code enforcement time because we are removing him from doing maintenance on buildings other than DPW buildings. So his time is going to be freed up to be able to do more. In addition, there are other managers in the utilities and operations and at DPW and the street department who will also, we're creating that culture, if you will, of if you see something, say something. I mean,
Okay.
we have tons of people out on the street every day. So it's just going to be a process of getting people up to speed on how to spot these, trash, litter, high grass and weeds, blocking a drainage swale or something, whatever it is, and get those things reported back into the DPW office so that they can be a formal inspection. And if there is a violation and notification sent out, then we just follow our process.
I think that sounds great. It's basically what you're saying is the guy's out there fixing a water main and sees the place all torn up, and we want those guys to report it back to the right people so that we can address it. I think that's fantastic.
Right.
That's what I meant by, preventative collaboration, everybody
And
working
that's
together.
where we're heading. We need to get that.
Well, okay. Well, if you need some money, now's the time to ask, because
I believe our proposed budgets are good, and I think we can get this done. It's just going to be some retraining, some educating folks, and just getting people moving in the right
you
direction.
need to bring in a consultant to. No.
But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Sounds good to me.
I want to make one statement based on what Scott mentioned, and it's obviously not related to the budget, but it's a public service announcement, quite frankly, but we have been, it feels like we've been working on this for about 25 years. It's probably been a year, but we are, I believe now, less than 2 weeks away from rolling out utility payments online, where you will have the ability to create your own username and password. You'll be able to view your billing history. If you've been a customer for a long time, you'll be able to view your billing history, at least going back to 2010, which is the inception of New World. You'll be able to view your consumption over that same time period. More importantly, you'll be able to set up a credit card payment for a recurring payment. So once you've set it up, you no longer have to worry about paying your bill. And you can also sign up for e-statements, so you can eliminate the paper bill that comes in the month. That's step one. Scott mentioned our segue then into the permitting area, but it's taken this long to get to this point. But I do believe we are less than 2 weeks away from that rolling out, and there'll be other prominently displayed announcements on that. But that's I think pretty exciting news for the city to finally get a robust utility payments platform.
We finally got a website that works, huh? And that's awesome. 2018. Well, Well, and I'll be honest, I'm excited about it because I'm a guy that pays all my bills electronically. It's been a complaint that I've had with Lawrence. I had it set up with Indianapolis for prior to, and I just never did understand. And I also felt like we're going to increase our collection rates based on this. And I definitely think we're going to maybe lose some money in late fees, but because people are going to be paying us consistently, but that's good, right, for our budget. We'll get slow paid, and I think this is awesome. But anyway,
I can say we've been testing it for at least 6 months, in particular on the recurring payment portion. Now, I have suffered a late fee in the testing process, but we're good now.
Collections?
I had to talk Scott out of turning me off.
well, I was part of the people that turned that tough bill and turning people off, but I think that's a good thing too, so folks don't end up being thousands of dollars behind on their water bill. But anyway, we need to address proposal number 18.
I make a motion to the full council for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to proposal number 18. By show of hands, all in favor? Since there's no way to oppose, motion carries. Also, too, I will entertain a motion for adjournment. I don't think we do. All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
No problem.
I'm going to go home and eat my lettuce wrap.